Hey soldiers, you are not going to believe what a multi-billionaire thinks that you need to do in order to be more satisfied with your life. You're not going to be able to believe this. Now, who are we talking about? We're talking about Charlie Munger. Who is Charlie Munger? Well, he's the Lord Palpatine, the Darth Sidious to Warren Buffett's Darth Vader in the Berkshire Hathaway Corporation. Now, look, all jokes aside, both of these men are extraordinary investors. We like looking at their behavior because they are long-term investors, and that's what we espouse here on the Soldiers of Finance channel. But now, they're not going to be right about everything. Just because they are good investors does not make them omniscient. And I think Charlie Munger's way off base with his most recent statement that we will get to in a minute. And I think, actually, if you follow this advice, you're putting yourself in grave financial danger. We're going to go all the way through it in just a moment. But look, Charlie Munger, just to go back to some other statements that he's made in the past, Charlie Munger has been wrong before. Charlie Munger, of course, he hates Bitcoin. And, I'm not a fan of crypto. We talked about that many times on the channel. But Charlie Munger is apoplectic when you talk about crypto or Bitcoin. He even makes this wild claim. This is one of the more colorful claims that he's made about it. He's called Bitcoin a currency that's useful for kidnappers and extortionists and so forth. I guess he missed the whole Lindbergh baby ransom note that asked for 50,000 US dollars. He's acting like money laundering and kidnapping and extortionism, those things didn't occur in human history prior to the invention of Bitcoin. In fact, I think that when La Cosa Nostra had its glory days, they were accepting US dollars. I think that's what they preferred when they came to your shop and said, hey, we're going to protect you. But you got to pay us money. And you say, well, protect me from who? And they said, well, we're going to protect you from us. They wanted money. They wanted US dollars. So Munger is, totally off on that. Now, on the flip side, I will say that he has made some comments with regard to China that have been taken out of context. Now, I actually think when you look at what he said with regard to China, he's actually right. And we're going to get to how wrong he is on his recent advice to you in just a moment. But let's take a look at what he had to say about China.
Mr. Munger, as a student of Chinese history, my question concerns China. In 1860, GDP per capita in China was 600. In 1978, the year Deng Xiaoping took over, it was 300. Today, it hovers around 9,500. Never before in the history of mankind have we seen such a rapid eradication of poverty, pulling approximately 800 million people out of destitution. You are on record as a zealous fan of the Chinese work ethic and Confucian values system. As we can see from the deteriorating U.S. relationship with China, the Western world does not understand China. What can we do to increase knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of the Chinese civilization?
Now, she asked that question. I guess she must work directly for Xi Jinping, because that was more of a statement than a question. But let's hear how Munger answers that.
Well, it's natural for people to think their own civilization and their own nation is better than everybody else. But everybody can't be better than everybody else. You're right, China's economic record among the big nations is the best that ever existed in the history of the world. And that's very interesting. A lot of people assume that since England led the Industrial Revolution and had free speech early, that free speech is required to have a booming economy as prescribed by Adam Smith. But the Chinese have proved you don't need free speech to have a wonderful economy. They just copied Adam Smith and left out the free speech, and it worked fine for them. As a matter of fact, it's not clear to me that China would have done better if they'd copied every aspect of English civilization. I think they would have come out worse because their position was so dire and the poverty was so extreme. They needed very extreme methods, totalitarian methods, if you will, to get out of the fix they were in. So I think what China has done was probably right for China, and that we shouldn't be so pompous as to be telling the Chinese they ought to behave like us because we like ourselves and our system. It's entirely possible that our system is right for us and their system is right for them.
Now, look, I've got to agree with him there. China is coming out of an entirely different philosophical tradition than the West. So the citizens of China, they may feel that their system is right for them. Now, look, over here in America, we don't have 100% unanimity in terms of, our system being right for us. Me personally, I feel like that today we are dealing with a lot of decadence and corruption in our system. So we really are, hard pressed to point the finger at anyone else. So I think Munger is absolutely right on that. And understand, Munger also sees China as an incredible investment opportunity. He's a major shareholder in Alibaba. And that leads us to his next statement in this same sit down, where he talks about Alibaba in relation to what China did and how they handled Jack Ma. And I think he's right here as well.
Gavin Smith from Berkshire, England, he asked, Mr. Munger is a champion of Chinese stocks. How concerned is he about Chinese government interference as seen recently with Ant Financial, Alibaba, and Mr. Jack Ma? What, for example, is to stop the Chinese government from simply deciding one day to nationalize BYD?
Well, I consider that very unlikely. And I think Jack Ma was very arrogant to be telling the Chinese government how dumb they were and how stupid their policies were and so forth. Considering their system, that is not what he should have been doing. And no, I don't think that. I think the Chinese have behaved very, very shrewdly in managing their economy, and they've gotten better results than we have in managing our economy. And I think that will probably continue. And sure, we all love the kind of civilization we have. I'm not saying I want to live in China. I prefer the United States, but I do admire what the Chinese have done. How can you not do it?
And look, he's absolutely right again. With regard to, hey, Jack Ma, you know the Chinese Communist Party better, or you should, than any Westerner because you're there on the ground in the country. You're native. All right. You've obviously had to deal with them in order to grow your business to the extent that you have. Anybody seen Jack Ma lately? I haven't seen or heard that. Oh, well. But what Munger here is saying is that, look, buddy, you knew what type of system you were dealing with. And you knew good and doggone well that being outspoken and challenging that system was probably not going to yield the best results. And remember, Jack Ma was an interesting character. I'll say he is, and wherever he is, hopefully he still is an interesting character. But Munger is right here as well. So we have an example, crypto, where Munger is, being a little extreme in his opposition to it. He doesn't really state the case as to why Bitcoin in particular, crypto in general, is not worth the investment dollar. He pivots to that old canard about corruption and crime facilitation through the use of crypto, which is what we've seen forever and a day with the US dollar. Okay, so he's actually, his argument actually on that score is one that is against the US dollar if he's going to confine it to criminal activity. Now, he could have said, where's the intrinsic value? Where's the utility? It's something like that. But, I have not heard him say that. He may very well have in other venues. Now, let's get to some of the worst advice coming out of Charlie Munger that I've ever heard, quite frankly. And again, I follow this gentleman and Warren Buffett. I honestly do not think they are the nicest people. You had Warren Buffett years ago when they were looking at doing some tax increases. He was advocating for them, saying that, well, my secretary, she pays a higher tax rate than I do. And Warren Buffett, that was being very, very underhanded in terms of that type of response, because Warren Buffett knows exactly why his secretary pays a higher rate of taxation than he does, because her income is taxed at the highest level. It's W-2 income. His income is investment income, which is taxed at a lower level. He knows this. So a lot of people were running around at the time saying, well, Warren Buffett, what you need to do is you need to raise your secretary's salary. No, what you actually need to do, Warren Buffett, is you need to sit your secretary down, if you care about her so much, and teach her how to create a business of her own where she can then be taxed at the same rate you are. W-2 taxation is not only usually the highest taxation, but it's the one with the least amount of flexibility in terms of tax savings. So if he was really this magnanimous, benevolent, money man, then he would have sat his secretary down and said, look, we need to transition you out of this high taxation arrangement and get you into your own business. I'm going to, shepherd you, tutor you, and be your mentor. And we're going to make that happen for you. If he really cared about it, which he didn't. He was just trying to curry favor with the presidential administration. Now, Munger's advice, he says that I'm going to tell you why this is bad advice. He says you need to stop complaining. He says everybody's 5 times better off than they used to be, says the billionaire. Billionaire Charlie Munger thinks we should all be a lot happier. Munger, the longtime investment partner and friend of fellow billionaire Warren Buffett, says he doesn't understand why people today aren't more content with what they have, especially compared to harder times throughout history. Well, Charlie, it may start in a grocery store where $80 is the new $40. I don't know. May start in the dairy aisle, for example, where eggs are like $5 or $6 a dozen. Last time Charlie Munger been in the grocery store, okay? I know he's a big investor in Costco. He's probably very happy with that investment. But does he make the connection of folk that don't have $1 billion bank balance and what they may be going through? He says you need to just think about other points in history and compare your life today to those points. People, this is a quote, people are less happy about the state of affairs than they were when things were way tougher, Munger said earlier this year at an annual meeting of the Daily Journal, the newspaper company where he's a director. Go talk to the people down in the printing office and see what they have to say. Gain some information from them, maybe, Charlie. The 98-year-old noted he came of age in the 1930s when Americans everywhere were struggling. Let me tell you something about that. Charlie Munger was born in 1924. So by 1934, he would have been 10 years old. And by the end of it, 1939 or so, he would have been, 15 years old, somewhere in there. So, Charlie, don't act like you were out there, standing in bread lines. You weren't. Of course, yeah, you lived through it, but how deeply did you actually experience it? And furthermore, Charlie, your father was a prominent attorney and your grandfather was a U.S. District Court judge. He was also a state representative as well. So you weren't, you weren't barefoot traveling across America running from the Dust Bowl, Charlie. people want to, tend to try to romanticize their upbringing in order to, emphasize certain points. He goes on to say, it's weird for somebody my age because I was in the middle of the Great Depression when the hardship was unbelievable. During that annual meeting, Munger complained that envy is the driving factor for too many people today. Yeah, some people may be guilty of envy, may say, hey, why can't I have a steak dinner? Because it's too expensive, but that guy can. Yeah, I guess so. Before the early 1800s, there were thousands of years where life was pretty brutal, short, limited, and in terms of what you have. There were no printing presses, no air conditioning, no modern medicine, he said. And that's all well and good, and that's true. But I didn't experience that. I am here now. I do not know of a time where there was no air conditioning. I do not know of a time, didn't experience a time rather, where, the animals had to come into my house, like in medieval times, and live because they couldn't live outside. The livestock actually had to come into my house. No, Charlie, I don't recall that. I'm sure I've read about it, but I haven't experienced it. I live in the here and now. This is a classic example of the gentleman being extremely out of touch. Also at this meeting, Munger pointed to the work of Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker, who has argued that the quality of life around the world has improved dramatically over the past century or two. That's true, citing evidence such as longer life expectancies and reduced global poverty. And that's fine, but nobody on the earth today is sitting back saying, well, you know what? 300 years ago, I didn't have running water. I wouldn't have had running water. So I'm just gonna be satisfied. Nobody's saying that because we're not comparing ourselves to people who lived in centuries prior to this one. We are comparing ourselves to the standard of living that we realize in modern history. Critics of Pinker's work say his views are overly simplified and ignorant of negative aspects of modern life, from growing wealth inequality to the ongoing existence of violence and political instability, factors that can still cause real suffering. In 2019, Munger Monster downplayed the effects of wealth and income inequality and claimed that the politicians who were, quote, screaming about it are idiots, unquote. If you're in the ivory tower, man, you can make statements like this because you don't feel it. He doesn't interact with, especially at his age, he doesn't interact with folk that are not as well heeled as he is. And if he does, it's in some type of media conference where, they're looking toward him as the oracle. And, that ego boost tends to kind of shade your thinking. Munger says, I can't change the fact that a lot of people are very unhappy and feel very abused after everything's improved by about 600% because there's still somebody else who has more. So, I can't feel a 600% increase in overall improvement in the quality of life and standard of living. I can't feel that. I can look around, and that's a broad generalization. That's just taking into account the entire society. That's not looking at these, again, instances where you have people working their asses off in 9-to-5 jobs and not being able to get ahead because wages have not grown as fast as inflation has. Okay, so let's boil this down. Don't listen to Charlie Munger. Don't be satisfied. Do not be satisfied. Here's a question. Is Munger himself satisfied? I don't think so, because he continues to make acquisitions. He continues to grow his business. I don't think the shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway want Munger to be satisfied. I think they want him to be rather unsatisfied in order to continue to push up their profits and grow their business. So what's good for the goose, Munger, has to be good for the gander, us. Now, you do have to continue to work a plan. Sitting down and complaining about the situation is certainly not going to be the antidote to being able to actually enjoy this life. No, you have to come to the realization that W-2 income is not where it's at in terms of advantaging you. The wage is not going to match inflation, as we just said. It's going to be taxed at the highest rates with the lowest amount of available deductions and advantages. Look, people, if you're listening to this channel, I got to believe that you have some entrepreneurial spirit within you. And we're going to do a lot more talking about that and construction of your own parallel economy as we move forward in 2023. But for now, I do want you to understand that the standard of living in America is dropping. This is a reason why you need to take drastic action right now. Now, we did this video about half of American adults living with their parents. And we did the video because you need to understand the trend, all right? This is very disturbing in terms of the degradation of the standard of living and quality of life here in America. Watch this video. There's a lot of information here. Guys, I'll talk to you soon.